What's up, guys? I just hosted an unbelievable debate between Frank Ebersold and Dr. Robert Epstein. And the title was, "Is there political bias in tech?" And both of them are left of center, politically. But Dr. Robert Epstein, who's always voted Democratic, through his research has found that there is enormous, or at least this is his position, there is enormous bias, left-wing bias, especially at Google. And he's got the graphs to prove it. Frank Ebersold pushes back, I think, fairly well here and gives his rebuttal to that. So I hope you enjoy the show, because I learned a lot here. And it was a great debate. I think it went on for almost an hour and 45. So enjoy. And as usual, this podcast brought to you by Aletha Health. If you have back problems, go to alethahealth.com, ALETHA health.com. I'm just telling you that I've been dealing with back problems my whole life. And the information, they send you a kit and a book. I'm telling you right now, you will solve your back problems. I mean, provided they're not insane and you don't need surgery. But if you've got back problems, start with alethahealth.com. They've got the tools and the information. It was founded by Christine Koth, who has been doing physical therapy for 25 years. And I personally have worked with her, and it's a game changer.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro song. Bryan Callen, it's one hell of an intro song. His comedy is marvelous. He's a genius in world politics.
Before we start, let me just say that I have my bias. I tend probably to lean in Dr. Robert Epstein's direction. My own experience, and it's very limited, and I've got anecdotal experience. I've done no research on this. I read one book, and I've listened to a lot of people talk, and so I find myself, my confirmation bias is to say that there is bias in big tech. And so, like, as I said to you before, Frank Ebersold, the fix is in. So the moderator here but I'm going to do my best to be as objective as I can, and I can't wait to hear your point of view. But it seems that Frank Ebersold believes there is not bias in big media for the most part, and Robert Epstein believes that there is. And I'd like to start with Dr. Epstein. Could you give us your biography? I could read it, but I'd rather hear it from you. I know you were an American psychologist. You were a professor, author, a journalist. You were awarded your PhD in psychology at Harvard University. You're editor-in-chief of Psychology Today, and you've held positions in several universities, including BU, where I almost went, Harvard, and you are currently a senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. Anything else you'd like to add there?
So that's pretty good. I've published 15 books. We could throw that in.
15. It's a lot.
But actually, you've introduced me so thoroughly that I think I can go straight to the issue, and I think I can state very clearly what my position is. First of all, I don't think the issue of political bias on Google and to some extent other big tech companies, but I don't think that issue is debatable. So here we are in a debate, debating something that I don't think is debatable. I don't believe that there's bias. I know beyond the shadow of a doubt, because I do very rigorous research, which I publish in top journals and present at scientific meetings. And I've been collecting data for more than 10 years, massive amounts of data in recent years, which demonstrate beyond any doubt whatsoever that there's not only bias, but it's extremely substantial, and it's sufficient to be flipping the outcomes of elections nationwide, in fact, worldwide. And it's also, now we're getting new data suggesting that it's the bias on Google is also being used to indoctrinate children on a massive scale. That's without the knowledge or consent of parents. So I actually can share, if it's appropriate at some point, I can actually share some data on screen that will show you how we do the research and what the data show, which, as I say, is clear beyond any doubt whatsoever.
We'll get to that for sure. Frank Ebersold, you are the host of All That's Left podcast, left-leaning show left-leaning show that highlights independent political commentary, right-wing media criticism, combined with a strong dislike of conspiracy theories. You and I have that in common, with an occasional look at what's crazy on the right today, which I think is a very important thing to do. All That's Left can be found wherever you get your podcasts. And it's important before, Frank, that to know, I don't know if you know this, but Dr. Robert Epstein considers himself left-wing, right? I mean, you tend to be left of center, at least, in your voting practices.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And your right, okay. But
he might be the only left-winger that's ever been published in Epic Times, though. I'll tell you, that's quite notable. But I've read those. And, what I try to do is I've got basically my background goes all the way back to, I'm outgunned, I know that, I realize that, but my background goes all the way back to, I used to work for Cargill Investor Services, and one of the things that I used to do at Cargill was negotiate contracts. So I became pretty good at tearing things down in terms of like the base elements, I think, of the arguments, and looking at those elements and actually kind of being a counterbalance to some of the stuff that I find. So I'm used to going through things in tremendous amount of detail, and I think I've done that here. And I've got some questions that'll kind of touch on articles that were written. And again, I just want to have an exchange here that basically just adds a little bit more of an explanation to some of what I've seen in some of the articles, the Joe Rogan podcast. And I've read, I think it was the work that you did back in 2015, Dr. Epstein, where you published these results that you're doing in the PNAS. So I've read through a lot of that. But, in general, what I'd like to do is just make sure that we're being fair and balanced in terms of what we're saying about Google. And, I hate to say that I'm here to represent Google because I've really had no contact or emails or anything with Google. But what I'd like to do is just sort of, scratch the surface of some of the things that I've seen and just get a little bit more explanation so that I can understand, your framework and your vantage point, with respect to Google. But, from one thing I'd like to say here is that you don't hear this very often, but Google is really an American success story when you look at how it began back in 1995. And I think to some degree we have to be pretty content with the fact, if not happy, that Google didn't happen in China. It didn't happen in Europe. It didn't happen in Russia. It happened right here, in the United States. And it began back in 1995 at Stanford University, where the two struck a partnership. So, I think that we have to look at it from that angle. And again, I'm not here to represent Google or anything like that, but I think as Americans, we've all had the chance to buy and hold, if you will, that American dream and partnership that those two struck back in 1995. So we just can't lose track of the fact that, this is really an American success story. So I know that there's a lot of people out there that have bashed Google and this kind of thing. And I'm trying to be a little bit more fair and balanced about this. And that's kind of the approach that I'd like to take today.
Great. I appreciate that. And I mean, I appreciate it. It's important. So Doctor, take it away here.
I could go on forever. But let me just hit you with a few facts. If you go to opensecrets.org, you will find that 96% of donations from Google go to Democrats. Now, I happen to lean in that direction, so I'm fine with that. But that tells you something right there. There was a leak of an all-hands meeting at Google, which was right after the 2016 election. I was very disappointed with the outcome of that election. I was a strong Hillary Clinton supporter. But in that video, you'll see all of Google's leaders up on a stage talking to all of Google's 100,000 employees and saying what a disaster this is for the country that Trump won, and that we will never let this happen again. And the chief financial officer of Google, Ruth Porat, actually says straight out, we will use all of the power and means and influence that we have to make sure this never happens again. Now, as it happens, I have been studying since 2013 methods that Google has available to it, which have never existed before in human history, and which the general public can't use, but Google has access to methods of influence and uses those methods of influence 24 hours a day, now impacting more than 4 billion people around the world. It uses those methods of influence for its own ends to shift people's thinking and behavior. And how do I know this is true? I know this is true because of leaks from the company, because of statements from whistleblowers from the company. But most important of all, I know it because of massive amounts of data that my team and I have been collecting over the years. In the 2022 midterm elections, we preserved more than 2.4 million ephemeral experiences. Those are experiences people have with, let's say, when they're doing a search on the Google search engine, or when they're looking at YouTube and YouTube is suggesting another video and then suggesting another video. We've preserved all of that content, which is Google internally calls ephemeral content. And that's what they use deliberately to influence people's thinking and behavior. How do we know that? Well, a leak of emails in 2018 from Googlers to the Wall Street Journal included a chat in which Googlers are discussing how can we use ephemeral experiences to change people's views about Trump's travel ban. When I saw that, I was stunned because that was an acknowledgement that they actually use that terminology and that they're aware that by using ephemeral experiences to impact people, they can have an enormous impact around the world with no one knowing what they're doing and without leaving a paper trail. That's the advantage of ephemeral experiences. Those are things like search results. They're ephemeral. They are generated just for you on the fly. They impact you. You click on one of them, and then they disappear and they're stored nowhere. No authority can go back in time to find out what ephemeral experiences, what search results they showed you. Search suggestions, which they flash at you while you're typing a search term. Again, those are ephemeral. Answer boxes, which they now place above search results and which are now to some extent being driven by AI. Again, those are ephemeral. News feeds, on and on and on. The point is, Google uses this content deliberately and strategically to guide people's thinking and behavior. In a leaked video from Google called The Selfish Ledger, an 8-minute video created by their advanced products division, the Google employees say straight out that we have the ability to re-engineer humanity. They call it resequencing human behavior according to, and I quote, company values. So I'm not making this up. That's a real video that was never meant to be seen outside of Google. It's called The Selfish Ledger. If you type in The Selfish Ledger on another search engine, please don't use Google. That's a surveillance platform. But the point is that they know they have this power. And I'll just mention one of the whistleblowers, and then I'll shut up for a bit. Tristan Harris is one of the people who left Google horrified by what he saw there. And I know Tristan. Horrified. His title there was design ethicist, and his job working with a big team was to impact the thinking, behavior, and feelings of more than 1 billion people around the world. That's all that team did day after day after day after day. Tristan was so horrified by this that when he left Google, he set up a nonprofit organization to try to combat this to try to constrain the power that this company has and the way in which they wield this power. I'll shut up for the moment, but at some point I want to get to the massive amount of data we've been collecting, which again shows without any doubt whatsoever the extent of bias in Google content. And it's political bias. It's in one direction, which I happen to like, but I don't like the fact that any private company that is not accountable to the public has this kind of power, wields this kind of power, has basically undermined the free and fair election, and is strategically influencing the thinking and behavior of now more than 4 billion people around the world every day. I don't like that.
Well, the one thing that you mentioned was the the donations that Google made, and I did take a look at Open Secrets, and what I found was that money was actually, the vast majority of the money was actually donated by employees. Would you agree with that?
Oh, well, it comes both ways. In other words, the ratios are about the same coming from the company itself, coming from Alphabet, which is the parent company, and coming from employees. But yes, you're right. About 96% of donations from employees themselves go to Democrats. That's true.
So, I mean, it's sort of, I know the point that you were making was that the machine is for the, Democrats, and it's moving in that direction. But I mean, the reality is that these are employees that are donating this money. So, quite honestly, I don't think that the donations theme carries the same amount of weight when it's the employees. If it was all Google, I'd say, okay, I believe this, but I can't fault the employees who can donate to whomever they choose, for choosing to donate more or less to Democrats. I mean, could you? I mean,
but they also build the algorithms, and they also make adjustments in the algorithms, and they also create the blacklist. I published a very big piece. You mentioned that I published a few pieces in the Epoch Times. That's because I've been banned from mainstream media. But before I was banned, which is so ironic, because I'm not a conservative and I'm not a Republican.
You've been banned?
But before I was banned, I published a long piece in U.S. News and World Report called The New Censorship, which was about 9 of Google's blacklists. And yet Google's leaders, including Sundar Pichai, the CEO, have said under oath in congressional testimony that they have no blacklist. In 2019, a senior software engineer named Zach Voorhees left the company, again, disgusted by the extreme political bias there, and brought with him 950 pages of documents and a video. He sent all of that to Bill Barr, then the Attorney General of the United States. And 3 of those documents were labeled blacklists. And they mainly consisted of conservative organizations. But the point is they were actually labeled blacklists.
And what happened as a result of that sort of whistleblower and all that information?
Nothing. Nothing happened. Nothing will happen. Nothing can happen, at least not at the level of regulation and law. But what is happening is that my team and I are building a nationwide monitoring system. We've been building them over and over again since 2016, but this one is going to be permanent. And so we are now doing to Google what they do to us and our children 24 hours a day. We are tracking them. We are preserving ephemeral content, which is normally lost forever. And just in the 2022 midterm alone, we preserved 2.4 million ephemeral experiences. And as of now, since we're running 24 hours a day, we are actually preserving ephemeral content through the computers of more than 7,000 registered voters, a politically balanced group of registered voters in all 50 states. And as of today, we have preserved more than 9 million ephemeral experiences, mainly on Google, but some other platforms as well. And so having preserved this information, we are analyzing it. And I can show you some graphs that will take your breath away. So remember, those employees Mr. Ebersold, those employees that you mentioned who donate to Democrats, they also program the algorithms. They also create the blacklist. They also make adjustments in the algorithms. And what I'm saying is that their political bias, which I happen to share, should not be allowed
to interfere with
influence
elections,
the thinking and behavior of billions of people around the world without any accountability, no relevant regulations or laws. They should not be allowed to have this power, and they certainly shouldn't be allowed to wield this power.
Well, you just said.
Well, the one thing I wanted to
go ahead, Frank.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask before you rebut that or talk about that, Frank. Dr. Epstein, you've been banned from from mainstream media. Where have you been banned from?
Everywhere, including places where I've published for years and years and years, and including places where I have personal friendships with the editors.
What does that look like? What does that look like? I mean, they just tell you that you're not welcome there, or what is the...
Well, I can tell you exactly what had happened is I was invited to testify before a congressional committee. I think that was in July of 2019. And then a couple of weeks later, Trump, whom I certainly never supported, Trump tweeted about my research, and which he didn't get it right. I mean, he made up some numbers, of course. But then the problem was that Hillary Clinton replied to Trump's tweet saying that my work has been debunked, which is absolutely false, and it was obtained from data from 21 undecided voters, which is absolutely false. And instantly, this got picked up by the New York Times and hundreds of mainstream media sources. And from that point on, that's it. My relationships all died. None of those editors replied to me anymore. And these are places I published in Time Magazine.
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
Even in Dissent.
So, Frank,
I published in Dissent, which is as left wing as you can get, a piece very critical about Google called Google Snoops, which is about how individual software engineers at Google have free access to your emails and your search histories, etc., and that they snoop into that content every single day, both to get their jollies, to get their laughs, and sometimes it's to crash parties. I mean, it's incredible.
What was the source of that? What was that source
that
again?
I published in Dissent magazine, which is about as left-wing as you can get. I'm just trying to say, I think cut off from all mainstream media, as far as I know, and so I've been forced to publish in places like the Epoch Times.
Frank, doesn't this worry you?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of give some pushback here in just a second. The first thing I want to talk is about the ephemeral experiences, but that where you just stated that you think that the engineers are looking in at Google Mail. Who is the source of that again? Dr. Epstein? Yeah, what was the source of that?
That thousands of Google engineers have free access to our entire Google profiles. That's public knowledge. Even Vince Cerf, who is still the head of that part of Google, even he has said publicly that they don't restrict access within the company. They don't encrypt because it would slow things down. So one of my sources, looking at to get the details, is a software engineer who's been at Google almost since the beginning. His name is Dr. Shamit Baluja, and he actually wrote a novel based on what happens inside Google and what the software engineers do for fun. And he basically, and I've been in touch with him too. And the point is, he basically just explained the culture there. The culture is one where, again, thousands of software engineers have free access to our profiles. You look like you're about my age, and I would say, therefore, you and I have both been using the internet for about 20 years. Do you know how much information, Mr. Ebersold, Google has about you?
Well, I'm sure they've got a lot here. And the one thing...
Take a guess. let's say they printed it out on regular 8.5 by 11 paper. How many pages of information do you think Google has about you?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, I've opted out of a lot of that information. You know, you've got the ability to do that.
That does nothing. That does nothing. It has no effect whatsoever. That's a game that they play.
Well, how do you prove
I know that again from statements from whistleblowers that they never erase data, and all of those illusions that they create, such as what do they call the incognito mode, has no impact whatsoever on what they actually collect.
So what you're saying is
never. How many pages, sir?
Well, give me an
estimate.
So the terms of service.
Well, you're forcing me
Google,
to tell you to answer the question which you refuse to answer. They have more than 3 million pages of information about you.
3 million pages? 3 million pages.
You don't.
But Frank, are you saying that Google doesn't do this? Are you? What is? Are you pushing back on this?
No, what I'm saying is that. What I'm saying is, Google is a company just like every other company. You know, they're out to make money. I get it. But they also abide by what they have to abide by. They don't want any more inquisition than they need. They don't want any more inquiry into their business methods. And this seems like a good way to start it by saying, you know what, the engineers don't care. They're in there reading everybody's email. The terms of service are BS. They don't care about that. I mean, this is one of the largest companies in America here. And let me just start with this. So the terms of service do state that you can actually turn a lot of that collection off. The only caveat was Dr. Epstein, let me finish. The only caveat was that if there's a lawsuit or something like this going on, like if all of a sudden your information was not, you didn't opt out of anything, and all of a sudden now you're part of a legal inquiry, you want to opt out, probably that's not going to happen. And that makes sense.
You know what? Seriously, this is such nonsense. I'm not even sure what to do. I'm not even sure what to say to you.
Well,
because if you're quoting now roughly from their privacy policy, which is embedded in their terms of service.
But you're saying they don't follow that. You're saying they don't follow it, right?
The privacy policy actually states in that same section that you are mentioning that they can elect to preserve your data for any purposes whatsoever that might be required by law, or to protect their company. That is a blanket, that's an absolute blanket reason why they never erase any data. Even if they make it so that you can't see your data, they are still collecting data. You know how many platforms Google is collecting data from you and your family? How many platforms they use?
I don't think you know, to be honest.
Of course I do. It's more than, of course I do. That's exactly what my team and I do 7 days a week, sir. This is all we do.
Just to jump in here,
and you are being tracked.
Frank, just to jump in here, I don't know anything about this. I've done no research. I do have a lot of friends whose business it is to work with Google and basically digital marketing on a big level. All of them tell me that there's no question Google collects all of your data. I don't think that's up for debate. Do you?
Well, I think that you can opt out of it. I mean, what do you think that? Why have something that you can opt out of if that's not the case? I mean, that's a lawsuit. That's a potential lawsuit.
But I agree. But it seems that you can't opt out of it. I've heard too many people. I mean, you would at least agree that most of the people that do this research, like Dr. Epstein, and you could find a lot of people who would say that actually is not possible. For a guy like you and I, we can't actually opt out of it because those software engineers have, not only do they have access, but in their terms and services, it says that they reserve the right to access that data if they need it and collect it. I mean,
well, I'm looking at the terms of service right now, and it says, and some data we retain for longer periods of time when necessary for legitimate business or legal purposes, such as security, fraud, and abuse prevention or financial record keeping. Now, if that means that the terms of service mean nothing, I mean, that's the only caveat that I see here. Everything else says that they're going to get rid of it.
That caveat is a blank check. I don't know why you don't see that. It's right in front of your eyes. You just read it. That caveat is the blank check. And what we've learned from whistleblowers, and there have been about a dozen in the past few years, is that they never, ever, ever erase data. Data, think of what, Google invented the surveillance business model. They don't sell anything, not at a profit anyway. They make a few phones now just for show. More than 90% of Google's revenue, you can look in their annual reports, comes from advertising, and it's all targeted ads, and all the targeted ads are ways that they monetize the data they're collecting about us. They sell us. That's all they sell. That's more than 90% of their revenue since they invented the surveillance business model, which unfortunately is now spread to thousands of companies. But you are completely
So what you're saying is that I'm totally wrong that you can opt out of information. I mean, to you,
you can check a box that says you opt out. Yes.
Frank,
does absolutely nothing.
Frank, do you
I don't believe that.
Frank, do you feel that Dr. Epstein, on the whole, is being paranoid, or do you think he's right about this stuff? Aren't you worried? Aren't you worried that we have technological platforms and people in power who can control not only everything we see, but are actually in a position with this persuasion technology to change public opinion and voting practices according to their metrics? Do you see any danger in that? Is that not something you worry about?
Okay, well let me take you down this road then. So, Dr. Epstein, I think you like the Brave browser. Am I right?
At the moment, it keeps changing because I'm always looking for tools that we can use to protect our privacy.
Okay, well, when you get down to the algorithm, the Brave browser doesn't publish their algorithm. Google doesn't publish their algorithm. So help me understand how, when nobody's publishing their algorithm, what you're saying is so evil, so god-awful evil about Google is really not happening at the Brave. How do you know? Tell me that.
Well, because I know Brendan Ike, who set up Brave, and I know that he also wrote Firefox when he was working at Mozilla, and that he left Mozilla because Mozilla, which is a nonprofit organization that was set up to try to preserve people's privacy, it turns out over a period of time that Google became 90% of their revenue. 90% of their donations were coming from Google. And so more and more and more, Firefox was being controlled by Google. Among other things, Firefox, in fact, admitted that before they take anyone to a website on that browser, they check Google's blacklist. And that gives Google information about what you're searching for. So, so Brendan went and founded another organization, and this is called Brave, and he's the last person in the world who would want to violate anyone's privacy.
Well, that's not good enough. That's not good enough.
He hates the surveillance. He has a different business model. So if you look at the Brave business model, you'll see how they are attempting to make some money. But they don't make much money. Google is now making almost $200 billion a year by monetizing personal information. And you didn't answer another question, which is how many platforms that they use to monitor us. So they're monitoring you, obviously, through Chrome and through Gmail and, applications you know about. Maybe you use Google Docs, for example. So they're collecting all that information about you. But in fact, they are monitoring us and our children over more than 200 different platforms, most of which no one has ever heard of. For example, Google bought, I'm just showing my watch, but they bought Fitbit. And they did that to get physiological data about people, tens of millions of people, 24 hours a day. A few years ago, they bought Nest, the smart thermostat company. And the first thing they did after they bought Nest was to install microphones inside the smart thermostat.
Really?
Google has also gotten patents.
How are they being
Google
allowed to do this?
Patents.
I don't understand how they're allowed to do this. I mean,
because
Frank, you got to be alarmed by some of this, right?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you the truth. It's like, I really don't have anything to hide. personally. I really don't.
I
I'm
know,
just
but they
that
can
type of
use
person.
that. But Frank, when people say that, historically, if you have that kind of power concentrated in a company that powerful, it's just a matter of time before they do use it against you. People always say, I have nothing to hide, so who cares about a surveillance state? The problem is that now you're relying on the goodwill of the people in power who you don't know, who have no accountability. I don't even know where they work. That's not that is anathema to democracy. That's not a good rebuttal, Frank, is it?
Well, the other point that I want to make is, that's my personal opinion.
But you don't care about all the things he's talking about.
No.
You don't care that Google is able to sway elections. You don't care about that.
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think they're doing anything that Apple isn't doing. I don't think they're doing anything that Facebook isn't doing.
But that doesn't mean that that's good, right? I mean, the whole point is big tech has too much power, and if big tech sways right or left, if big tech starts swaying right, if an Elon Musk character comes in and buys Google or whatever, you'd be pretty alarmed if they started pushing their agenda too, wouldn't you?
Well, the point
a minor correction here, sir. Okay, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has called Google's business model, the surveillance business model, he calls it creepy and said it should be made illegal. So you're quite wrong. Okay, it's not every company does what Google does, and what Google does is despicable and should not be allowed. Can I show you just a couple of pie charts?
Sure.
Will that show up on your screen?
Let me get back to this one thing. So the point is, all of these companies are collecting information, and I think you'll agree with that. Now, whether Tim Cook says this or Tim Cook says that doesn't change the point that they're all collecting information. Now, what I think
let's get back to facts then. Let's get back to facts, since you seem to be one of the only people in the world.
Well, hang on, I'm not done. I just want to say this. So, with respect to what you do, Dr. Epstein, I think that there is a value in terms of a little bit of like oversight, regulation. I don't doubt that there is a benefit there, but you're zoned in on Google, which I think is, you're missing the forest for the trees. I think you probably should expand what you're doing. I'm not saying what you're doing is terrible, but the one thing I want to get back to, and I just got to get this point. You mentioned the ephemeral experiences, and I know I'm rewinding a little bit here, but in that Wall Street Journal article that came out on November 15th of 2019, and it's entitled "How Google Interferes with Its Search Algorithms and Changes Your Results." One of the things that they did was they looked at these ephemeral experiences with the autocomplete. But I'd like to just point out that I've looked at their charts on that article, and they show what Google does, what DuckDuckGo does. They typed in the phrase "Joe Biden is," and then let them both autocomplete. And when I looked at Google, the autocomplete said "done," how old, from, running for president, yada yada. DuckDuckGo said "an idiot, creepy, from what state, too old to run for president." And they did the same thing with Donald Trump, and it said DuckDuckGo said Donald Trump is a moron. So I think I want to say autocomplete, and I know this is a big part of what you look at. In my opinion, it looks to me like DuckDuckGo is giving you a 5th grade level of autocomplete, and Google is actually giving you a college level autocomplete. Now, if that comes by them tweaking, I'm okay with that.
It sounds.
You know what I mean? I mean, DuckDuckGo is like, it's insane. The autocomplete on DuckDuckGo.
Hold on, I've got to lower my screen for a bit. Hold on. Sorry, keep going. I'm listening.
So, Frank, I think one of the things I'll say, and Dr. Epstein, I'll say this, is that there's a lot of right-wing sort of pundits and personalities and podcasters that complain about the left-leaning bias, shadow banning, and things like that. I will say that there are a lot of right-wing shows and personalities and talking heads who make a lot of money on big tech. I've never had a problem confirming my bias, I suppose, right of center bias. I for example, I'll just if you were to call me a right winger, I don't know, but I believe in the free market. I'm more of a capitalist. I just live that way. and I have a huge problem with this gender ideology. I have a huge problem with it. I think there are two genders, and I have no problem if you want to be a woman, but this gender affirming care for children is outrageous to me, and I'm willing to go to war for it. But that's me. But what I'm saying is I can find I have no problem finding people that agree with me on Google. I'm sorry, on YouTube, for example. So there is an element to big tech that confirms my bias and gives me my community. So maybe I'm just kind of trying to help you out there, Frank, in the sense that maybe you're looking at Google as a business. They have their corporate rights, and we all use it. It's a little bit like using oil. We don't like that it pollutes the environment, but we're all addicted to it. It's a good company in that sense. So I don't know if that helps your case, Frank, but I'm just trying to kind of
I guess, when you were talking about the amount of data, the point that I was trying to make was that a lot of these companies are doing the same thing. And if we don't like that, I think the clear thing that we have to do is obviously we have to get a little bit more hands-on with regulation, and that gets into a whole different aspect of it. But, the other point that the other point I'd like to make on what you're doing and the work that you're doing, Dr. Epstein, is that with regard to the algorithm, all right, I want to focus on that. With regard to the algorithm, Google is processing 3.5 billion search results per day. And I can't help but address the elephant in the room, which is you don't know what makes that algorithm work. You have no idea what makes it work, and you have no idea, unless your friend has told you, what makes it work over at the Brave. It's the same situation. The algorithm is your enemy. You have no idea what's going on, what the secret sauce is.
But look at this.
At the Brave search engine.
Frank, look at this.
Can you see my screen?
Frank, look at this. That's kind of crazy. I don't like any of it, but I mean, geez,
Can you see my screen?
It looks like Yahoo.
When the New York Times or The Economist, when they've done these silly little studies in which they conclude there's no bias on Google, you know what they're using? They're using an anonymized computer because they want to be anonymous, right? And sure enough, they don't see any bias because Google sends out personalized content. Google does not recognize those computers as people. They know those are not real people. They know they're just bots. This is what they send to real people. Can you see this or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not getting that on my computer. And the reason why is because I turned that off when I opted out of it. So it does work to a certain extent, Dr. Epstein.
Not at all. Not at all. In fact,
I'm not getting it because I opted out of that search complete.
So, Frank, can I just show you what it says? It's kind of crazy.
I see it. No, I see it. I see it.
Okay.
Okay, now watch. Are you watching? Because I'm showing you real data that are brand new. You watching? Okay. So here is these are the 5 days before the November midterms, including November 8th, which is election day. And this is showing you bias on Google and bias on Bing. Anything below the line, see that Google, that left bar, that's showing you liberal bias, which you can see is quite substantial on Google, much less so on Bing. We don't just monitor Google, we monitor for comparison purposes Bing, Yahoo, YouTube, Facebook, and we're adding TikTok. But wait a minute.
I see the charts. I see the charts, but let me ask you this. I mean, can you tell me whether or not you know what the algorithm does? I mean, let's answer me that. Do you know?
I know what it shows to real people because this is based on a politically balanced group of 2,742 registered voters.
That's not enough. That's not enough. That's not enough.
But Frank, he is showing you. I mean, Frank, you got to admit at least, you don't think that there is liberal bias in big tech when you see these graphs?
Well, what I'm saying is that what Dr. Epstein is trying to tell you is that his data set, which is inherently so small, I don't even think it's meaningless. It's meaningless. He can't replicate what the algorithm is doing. I mean, they're processing 3.5 billion searches a day. You can't tell me that You
I'm
even
showing
come
you
close
what
to that. That's the problem,
I'm
Dr.
showing you
Epstein.
what the
That's
algorithm is doing. It. These are called representative samples, and I'm showing you what the algorithm is doing.
It's not enough.
Okay,
It's
so
nothing.
You have no idea. You have no idea what the
statistics.
algorithm is doing. You have no idea, and there's no way that your analysis can replicate that.
Value? You see that p less than 0.001? That tells you that the chances of us getting this difference by chance alone are less than 1 in 1,000. So, depending, I mean, I teach statistics at the doctoral level. I know how this works. Well, and if you're getting p-values that are that small, that tells you that, in fact, you do know what's happening in the larger sample. And don't forget, we're not using anonymized computers. We're looking over the shoulders, with their permission, of thousands, and we're building that nationwide sample of field agents to be very, very large right now. So right now we're past 7,000.
It's not enough, Doctor.
You're saying that his research is just simply not relevant here?
It's the theme of what he's trying to do. I get that it's relevant, but the way that he's going about it, the problem is, the Achilles heel is that he can't replicate, nor does he know what the algorithm is doing.
So how would you do it?
Of course I know what the algorithm is doing. This is how you determine what an algorithm is doing. I've been a programmer my whole life.
Not when they process 3.5 billion searches a day. You can't meet that metric.
Yes, you can do. But you can with sampling, Frank. That's we do this all the time. I mean, that's what statisticians do all the time, and that's what they do when they draw a poll, right? I mean, polls can be wrong.
Well, and that's what the Nielsen.
So show me
what the Nielsen company does.
Show me where you've done this.
Recruit
with millions of data sets. I mean, I need to.
We do it with TV all the time.
You can't tell me that 2,742.
No, we do it with TV all the time. I grew up in this business. I mean, I'm telling you that we lived and died. Every time I would do a TV show, we lived and died by the Nielsen ratings because they were a really good sampling of how many people were actually watching. And that's been as old as TV.
And that's Bryan, that's exactly what we've done. Our system is modeled after the Nielsen system, except we recruit people very, very carefully. We vet them. They sign multiple NDAs, and we install custom software that cannot be detected on their computers with their permission. And look at this. Can you see this pie chart? This is showing you recommendations made to voters. Now, this is voters who are moderates, liberals, and conservatives on Google's YouTube platform. And notice that most of the recommendations being made, more than 76% of them, are coming from liberal news sources. Well, you might say, well, in fact, Google would say, well, that's what's out there. We're just showing people what's out there. Actually, that's not what's out there.
Well, let me ask you this. On the Joe Rogan podcast, on the podcast that you did with Joe Rogan at about 2 hours, 26 minutes, and 45 seconds, you said he was trying to search, why do people fear Google? You remember that, right? Why do people fear Google? It was towards the end. And you told him, you said, whatever you are getting has to do with your history. So someone else is going to get a different list, which is scary because that's a con. And the more you know about someone, the easier it is to con them. That's the problem here, doctor, is that there's too many variables. Everything is personalized. You don't know the algorithm. There's too much going on here for you to get a legitimate handle to say that Google is evil.
That's
that
false.
Google is evil.
We're doing exactly what the Nielsen company does, except we're now doing it at a larger scale.
This isn't a TV show. This is not a TV show.
No, this is people looking at screens and people seeing content on screens. And I'm trying to tell you, if you just pay attention, you really just need to pay attention more and actually look at real data.
This podcast is brought to you by Ketone IQ. If you are looking for energy, if you're looking for clean energy, if you're looking for a drink that honestly doesn't taste good, but hold on, truly works. Why do I know that? They signed a deal with the Special Forces. They signed a deal with the Tour de France. I heard that 60% of their cyclists use Ketone IQ. It was developed by DARPA. You know what DARPA is? It's the scientific secret technology wing of the Department of Defense. Any more questions about that? It's unbelievable. So it's Ketone IQ, but go to HVMN, H as in Harry, V as in Victor, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy.com/Bryan, BRYAN, 20% off. And let me know what you think. It's an unbelievable, you'll feel how your body feels when your brain and your body are fueled by ketones. That's all I know. And they did it scientifically. It's basically brain fuel and clean energy. Give it a shot.
And look at the methodology. The methodology is rock solid. Okay, these are representative samples of registered voters. It's politically balanced. And one of the problems we run into, which shocked us, is that the content that Google sends to conservative voters is more liberally biased than the content they send to liberal voters. That is the arrogance of that company. You know why they're doing that? Because they can, because there are no restrictions on them whatsoever, no laws and no regulations. So look, I can, if you're not convinced yet, let me just skip ahead and show you one
let
thing.
Me ask,
there's
one thing I want to ask you about.
Because
there's one thing I want to ask you about. Is that Google allows you to show personal results. It's a toggle that you can. It says choose whether search can show you personal results based on info in your Google account, and it pertains to autocomplete, like I talked about. It also says that recommendations for you based on activity in your Google account, like discover stories, what to watch, where to eat, etc. So how do you account for that? I mean, there's a toggle. It's not just the search results. Everybody, and you're right, which you told Joe Rogan, everybody's search results drive their results is exactly what's happening. You can't replicate that. There's no way that you can. I mean, it's Herculean. I'm glad that you've tried, but I don't think you've come to grips with the facts that you cannot do it. You cannot
We're building
what Google is searching.
A nationwide digital shield. We add more than 100 people a day to the shield. We now are past 7,000 registered voters in all 50 states. By the end of this year, we're going to have a permanent, large-scale representative sample running in all 50 states, much larger than the Nielsen sample. And we know the demographics of these people so that we can do breakdowns by demographics. Now, what I want to show you here is something that I hope, if you have children or grandchildren, will scare the living crap out of you, because we're now starting to recruit children and teens through their parents. We now have recruited more than 1,400 children and teens, and we're beginning to get data that they get sent to them on their mobile phones and their tablets. And if you will please look, sir, at this particular pie chart. Can you see the pie chart?
I can't see it.
This is showing you.
We can't see it.
Let's see. Can't see it? Okay, let me click on share screen again. Click share. Let's see if you can see it now.
Yep, we can see it.
Wow.
Okay,
wow.
What this is showing you,
wow.
Okay, this is not what I expected to see, okay, and I have children, and this concerns me greatly. This is not what I expected to see. This is mind-boggling. This is showing you that 96% of the content that's being recommended to children and teens on YouTube, which is owned by Google, 96% has a liberal bias. Now, that's
on
much.
What's that based on, though? What's the analysis behind the pie chart that you're showing us?
Listen,
I see the chart. What's it based on?
Frank, you can't stonewall like that, because I can tell you I have kids. There is no doubt that that's going on. I mean, do you have kids? Have you seen this? It's crazy.
Well, again, it's an algorithm. The same thing happens on TikTok. I mean, the same exact thing is happening on TikTok.
No.
Yes,
this is very different.
It's been discussed. It is the same thing. I mean, the more of something that you watch, and I believe that Google is doing the same thing, the more their idea is they want to have eyes on the screen. So the more that someone watches, the more they will feed it to you. I mean, there's not some insane plot here to try to redirect all the children of the nation to watch, left-leaning videos because that's what they want to do. It's because they're feeding them what they'll watch a video, and then the next video is more. The next, I mean, it's the same concept that they're all.
You have to look
that's how they
at
work.
actual Google leaked emails, leaked documents, whistleblower statements, leaked videos. You have to actually have to look at that to see what they're really doing. And that pattern of donations, which you acknowledged. The fact is, they want the whole world to match Google's values. Okay, according to Google's values, that's an
I think you got it. Okay, I think you got it wrong here. I think that they're capitalists. Their object is to make money. Their object is eyes on screens. They don't care if someone is more Republican or, if the population is. What they want to do is make money. So you have to look at what they're doing. Don't all
three of us care about how people vote and think? If we have, all three of us probably care. I don't know why you'd say that they don't care. These are young people typically who are highly educated. They come out of liberal universities. They do have their point of view on life. They may be capitalists. They're certainly making good money in a marketplace. But I don't think that's so fair, Frank. Is it? I mean, isn't it possible that since all of them seem to donate to liberal causes, this might be a Donald Trump effect, by the way, but let's just say that they lean left. It's not hard to believe that they would try to, as we all do, as all of us do, we all try to mold the world in our image. I'm certainly guilty of that. So, you know what I'm saying? So I think that.
Well, yeah. Let me just throw this out though, Andrew. I mean, we talked about. And I think Dr. Epstein has mentioned that he sort of mentioned that a rogue engineer could go out and change the algorithm. Like, this is what I'll decide to do today. I'm going to go out and tweak the algorithm. And, in that same Wall Street Journal article, they actually mentioned that there's a team of more than 10,000 contract workers. I'm reading from it now, who work from home and get paid by the hour to evaluate search results. The rankings supplied by the contractors who work from a Google manual that runs to hundreds of pages can indirectly move a site higher or lower in results. So there's more going on than a rogue engineer just saying, oh, you know what, today I'm going to tweak something. And, there's more of a thought process going on here, folks.
You don't like, Frank, it sounds like, Frank, it sounds like you don't like the idea, the conspiracy theory, sort of the cabal of evil men in a smoky room a suggestion here, right? I mean, it sounds like you're pushing back on, because there is a lot of this, and again, I'll remind people that Dr. Epstein is left of center, but I think, do you feel that maybe your antenna is up and you're worried that this will yet again be another conspiracy theory that is taken by the right?
Here's one of my concerns.
Not a conspiracy theory. Look at this new graph that I'm putting up.
Okay, but before you go on that, let me just tell you.
You weren't concerned about 96%.
Let me just say this, Doctor. Hang on. One sec. So just to that point, my one concern about this is that, we live in a world where everything's a conspiracy theory. We've got rigged elections. We've got COVID conspiracies over here. Every day I push back on some of these insane conspiracy theories. And, this is something, and I hate to put it this way, but I think a lot of the work that's going on here is just another tool that they're going to use to say, oh, my God, here's another example of rigged elections. Dr. Epstein is giving us all of this information. And the fact that Donald Trump actually tweeted something like thumbs up, leads me to believe that, this is yet another tool that they can use.
Frank, you're like...
But I'm not they. I'm not them. Yeah. I am not them. Do you understand what my background is? Do you understand?
I understand that what my political leanings
are? Now look at. Can you see this new bar graph? Can you see the new bar graph?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yep. Yes.
Okay. Well, what this is showing you is on election day, November 8th, 2022, in Florida, 100% of liberals were getting go vote reminders on Google's homepage. That big graphic thing that says "Go vote, go vote, go vote," right? And they were saying that over and over again.
Just hang on for a second. Let me ask you this:
look at the graph. Only, what is it? 59% of conservatives in Florida were getting that same "Go vote" reminder. That is a blatant and outrageous vote manipulation. If that were done nationwide, that would shift on that one day 450,000 votes. And how do I know that? Because Facebook did a study with 60 million of its users, and they published it in an academic journal with colleagues of mine from the University of California, San Diego. That's how I know that number.
Well, I've read the article.
Actually doing it.
I've read the article, Dr. Epstein, that you wrote in Epic Times, about this. And I just want to say I've never seen someone so upset about something that just says go vote. Right? And at the end of the day,
but Frank, wait. Let me just finish.
Okay. One second.
All right.
In the article that you published here, you said in the end, it's basically conjecture. If Google hid the prompts from a few Republicans, if, we don't know.
It was conjecture then because we weren't monitoring that. So we started monitoring it, and this is what we found in the 2022 election. We weren't monitoring then, so it was conjecture then. It's no longer conjecture. They are actually doing this nationwide.
Frank, you know what's funny about this debate is I have to say, I'm probably, I have the same issue. I think, Frank, for you to believe that there are people who are deliberately doing something in an organized fashion, and I always push back on this myself. I have a podcast called Conspiracy Theory, Conspiracy Social Club. And I push back. My friend comes with these conspiracy theories, and I'm always like, it drives me nuts. The election rigging and all that. And so for me, I would have said, yes, but Google's a business, and I get it. And so I really do share your optimism about the human spirit. I really do. But having listened to Dr. Epstein and watching all these videos, man, it's very difficult to rebut this stuff. If you start looking at these graphs, at least I can say that it does seem that when you're doing all this meta-analysis, and I hear you on the fact that it is a massive, massive undertaking, and when they've got 3 billion searches a day, you're obviously taking a very small sample. You have to take that into account. But overall, it does seem, would you at least admit that Dr. Epstein is on to something here, where we do have these very powerful companies making $200 billion a year who seem to have an ability, if they can do this in marketing, if they can get you to buy something by getting you by refocusing your eye, they can then at least do that by letting the people who they agree with see the kind of stories they want them to see with the bias that they have in those stories to sway an election. If you can do it with marketing, you can do it with an election. True or false?
Well, I think that there's two sides of this too. There's the whole side of what Google's doing in terms of marketing their products, right? Now we're getting into the capitalistic Google. Mm-hmm. I don't doubt that they show certain companies over other companies, and it's been proven that bigger companies like Amazon, they take preference.
Sure.
I mean, that's the capitalistic Google doing what a capitalistic company will do.
Right.
And the point I guess I'm trying to make is that they've been punished for that, right? There's stuff that they've been fined for that. They've been fined by the EU, almost to the point of like what was it, $5 billion. And I think
they're past 10 billion euros in fines now.
Right.
In the EU, but never here. No one will.
Why not?
Here.
Why not here, Dr. Epstein? Is because they're just too powerful politically? What's going on?
There's two reasons. Number one is because they bought all the Democrats. The Democrats rely on them not only for money. In 2016, Google/Alphabet was Hillary Clinton's largest single donor. And that's not even including the donations coming from those 96% of employees.
She still lost.
So they bought the Democrats. Yeah, they bought the Democrats, but the problem is Republicans hate regulation. Now, on the other hand, who's the Speaker of the House in
McCarthy?
I forgot his name.
Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy. No, not him. No, it's not. No. So it's someone else.
Mitch McConnell.
But anyway,
Mitch McConnell.
The guy who's kind of funny and has a little Southern accent. And
Kennedy.
I spoke on a stage with him. Huh?
Rand Paul or Kennedy I don't know.
Lindsey Graham? You don't mean
Oh,
Lindsey Graham. Thank you, sir.
Yes, yes.
Well, he's not speaker,
Yeah, so
right? I mean, he's
Lindsey,
a senator. Senator
Right.
Graham.
He's senator, yeah.
Right. So Lindsey Graham actually posted a video just a couple of days ago in which he's calling for the strict regulation of these companies. He says they basically have taken over our democracy. He's not the only one who said that. That's also been said by Roger McNamee and Jaron Lanier. Roger McNamee and Jaron Lanier are both left-wing billionaires who were the earliest investors in Facebook and Google. And both of them have said that these companies, if they had known what they were going to turn into, they would never have invested in them.
Wow.
Because what they've turned into are just shameless monopolies of pushing the opinions, the thinking, the purchases, and the votes of billions of people without any constraints on them whatsoever. That's where we stand now.
Well, I'll tell you, I will agree that there needs to be some form of regulation, for these guys, because they do operate in a vacuum. And there needs to be some sort of regulation from somebody on this stuff. But,
I love it. We have some agreement. We have some agreement.
Yes,
Frank.
we agree on that. We agree.
No, we don't agree. No, we do not agree, because regulation and law move so slowly and tech moves so quickly that no regulations, even if some are eventually put into place, will have any impact on them whatsoever. I can give you a perfect example.
So what do we do
that.
then? So instead of no regulation, what do we do? What's the alternative? Tracking them and shaming them
Well,
publicly?
there are two things that can be done. One is Google, at least to take care of Google's monopoly on search, and I published this in Bloomberg Business Week the day before I testified before Congress. Google's index, which is the database they use to generate search results, could be declared a public common. There's precedent for that in law. It'll never happen in the U.S., but the EU could do it. I mean, I've spoken in Brussels. I've been in touch with people there. And the EU could do it since 5 of Google's data centers are located in the European Union. They could declare Google's index to be public, to be a public commons. That would then allow thousands of other search engines would be set up by high school students, by, Lithuanians, by anybody, drawing on excellent data from Google's index and creating their own search engines. And now search would become competitive again. It would become innovative again.
That's good.
Since Google dominated, which is now almost 20 years ago.
What about
ChatGPT?
Is ChatGPT that very competitor?
It's not a game changer. And we are already set up to monitor content coming from these new AIs that these companies are using. It's just another form of content. And we're monitoring all kinds of content. We're even monitoring the answers that personal assistants like Siri and Alexa are giving you, because it turns out when those answers are biased, and they are, when those answers are biased, that can easily shift between 20 and 80% of undecided voters, but no one having the slightest idea that they're being manipulated by biased content. No one even knows when it's occurring. The same is true with search results.
The lack of accountability and the amount of power is what I worry about. And I don't care, because what happens is you are now, it's really now a question of who's in charge of these tools and these instruments. And I think this country was founded on the notion of objective law. It's not ruled by man, it's ruled by law. And I think that's one of the reasons, because human beings, whether you're right, left, or a center, cannot be trusted. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean that's. But
let me add.
Yeah.
Let me add this in, Andrew. I mean
it's Bryan, but I actually like Andrew. I like that. I like the name Andrew better than Bryan. You've said it twice, and I've been like, I kind of like that. That's my nickname. Keep going.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
I don't mind.
But the thing that he would like to do, it seems like, would be to basically, if you made Google give up their index, I mean, that would basically break the company right there.
Not at all. They still make billions of dollars, and they wouldn't be giving up their index; they'd be sharing it, just as AT&T was forced by the federal government to share all of its patents in 1952, and that created an explosion of innovation and competition in the electronics industry. It certainly didn't put AT&T out of business. And Google does share its index with some companies selectively. So there's precedent for it in their business practices, precedent for it in law. It's very light touch regulation. But to answer Brian's question more fully, the other thing that can be done is exactly what we're doing, which is setting up monitoring systems, because large-scale monitoring is the same as shining sunlight down on the content. And content that's all ephemeral, that, remember, is normally lost forever, and you can't go back in time and see what it was. But by preserving it, analyzing it, and exposing it on a daily basis, which is what we're headed toward here, this will stop these companies. It'll force these companies to back away from our elections and to back away from our children. As Justice Louis Brandeis said, it was former Supreme Court justice, said this 100 years ago, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Monitoring systems, that's what the impact is. And how do I know this works? Because on November 5th, 2020, 3 U.S. senators sent a threatening letter to Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, in 2 pages summarizing our findings from the 2020 presidential election, which showed extreme political bias sufficient to have shifted 6 million votes to Joe Biden, whom I supported.
Wow.
The point is, they sent a threatening letter to Sundar Pichai saying, how do you account for this? 2 pages summarizing our initial data. And do you know what Google did as a result?
No.
They shut off all of their bias in the Georgia Senate runoff elections. They literally shut it off completely so that not a single person in Georgia was getting any go vote reminders. And bias on Google's search results went to 0, which is the first time we've ever seen that.
So, the go vote reminder, that just gets me. I got to go back to that. So how in the heck is a go vote reminder, if it's put on Google, I mean, how is that bad? And the fact that it might persuade more Democrats to go vote than Republicans. I mean, the fact that everybody's getting it.
They're not everybody, but not everybody's getting it. Only 50% of the Republicans.
But we can't prove that. You can't prove that not everybody's getting it. Of course we prove it.
That's how you prove it. You prove it with a representative sample of registered voters. You look at the statistics, and that difference that you saw was again significant at the 0.001 level, which is very hard to reach. Not only that, the study that Facebook published, in which they sent go vote reminders to 60 million of their members, they calculated, Facebook itself calculated, and they published this in a scientific journal, that had caused 340,000 more people to vote that day who otherwise would have stayed home on their sofas. So don't underestimate the power of a go vote reminder, especially on Google's homepage, since that homepage is seen 500 million times a day just in the United States.
So what you're telling me is that your representative sampling was sufficient enough in your mind to actually tell you that they're not showing it to Republicans as much as they are to Democrats. So is that what you're saying, Dr. Epstein, is that the go vote reminder was another little conspiracy theory?
This is not in my mind. This is using rigorous methodology and rigorous statistical analysis. And the results were significant at the 0.001 level, which means the chance that we got these differences by chance alone were less than 1 in 1,000.
In your sample size?
That is what he does for a living. I mean, on a PhD level, though, Frank. Like you're just saying it's a conspiracy theory, but I mean, if he's showing you that with his research, and he was persuasive enough to get these Republican senators to send a letter to the CEO of Google, and the CEO of Google shut off all their bias, something's going on here, right? I mean, isn't there? I mean, it's one thing to stonewall, and I get that you don't want this to become a conspiracy theory, but it sounds like a very powerful company has a political bias, and they are manipulating, they are using their power to get their side to see what they want them to see. I don't know that sounds like a conspiracy theory. It sounds very human.
It doesn't seem to me like, it gets back to that sample size. And, he can say that he's got, all of these different monitoring stations and this kind of thing. But the one point that I made to you, Dr. Epstein, you never came back on it, is that how do you account for the fact that in Google you can opt in and out of different things that affect the search results? So how can you supposedly replicate something where people have the variability? And you even said it to Joe Rogan, oh, your history is such that you won't see that. I mean, there is another variable. So how possibly can you attempt to replicate an algorithm that you know nothing about? That's my point.
I think you have. I mean, I think you've done as good a job as you could, given all the graphs and stuff. So I don't think we're going to get anywhere with that. And it sounds to me like you still don't trust Dr. Epstein's work, or the fact that since he understands the algorithm, you just you don't accept his findings. And I think that maybe like me, Frank, maybe like me, if I could, you are afraid of another conspiracy theory that can be used to probably just be more disruptive. But I have to say that I'm just as the moderator here, and again, I told you what my bias was. I do think that Dr. Epstein, being left of center, he's voted that way, he's been that way. With all this information, I do think there's something going on here. If you read Douglas Murray's book, The Madness of Crowds, he does a pretty darn good job of showing you that. I did my own experiments with that. But look, listen, we could talk forever, but I think at the end of the day, we need more of this. And Frank, it takes a lot of guts to come debate a PhD who does this for a living full time. And I love that you are willing to have a dialogue, and I don't think there's enough of it. And I think you're important for this debate. I may not agree with you, but I think you're very, very important, because what you're doing, I always say that, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, have people in your circle you disagree with, because they'll keep you honest and they will push back. And you ask some really good questions, which is we're dealing with.
I would like to say something supportive to Frank Ebersold.
Please.
Because I think I've been very harsh here. I am passionate about these issues. I admit it. And believe me, I don't want to be finding these results. Not at all. This is not what I want to be finding, but I keep finding it over and over and over again. And if anything, my concerns have grown over the years. And as our sample size has increased and I've become more confident about what we're finding, my concern has grown and grown and grown. But it's still, I want to actually say something to you that's very supportive. So here I go. It's hard to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. You are right. People take my findings and they use them for their own selfish purposes. Now, who are those people? Well, some of them are conspiracy theorists. And it really bothers me. It bothers me a lot. It makes me feel sometimes like I shouldn't even do this kind of research because it's getting misused from my perspective. It's getting used by people who are sometimes, I call them right-wing conservative nutcases. And now, a few of those people have become friends of mine. Why? Because in my own family, among my own friends, people have stopped talking to me. It's not just that I've been cut off by mainstream media. I've also paid here and there a pretty stiff price personally, because I gave a private briefing. So you might have seen this on Joe Rogan, because I did say it there. But I gave a private briefing in 2019 to a bunch of state AGs at Stanford University. I was finished. I went out in the hall and I waited. Their meeting ended. One of the AGs came over to me. I know exactly who he was. He's still an AG. And he said, Dr. Epstein, I don't mean to scare you. He said, but I think you're going to be killed in some sort of accident in the next few months. And obviously I wasn't killed.
This was an attorney general?
Yes. And obviously, I'm still here, so I wasn't killed a few months later in some sort of accident, but my wife was.
I'm so sorry.
And
I heard about that, and it's incredibly sad. In the story that you told, I heard that it was.
But that's not the only incident. That's not the only incident. So because last year, my managing director, who was fabulous and was probably in line to really take over, a lot of my work. She and her husband were walking in downtown San Diego, 2:00 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and a man ran up out of the blue, pulled the knife, slit her husband's face, very, very handsome man, by the way, all the way from his ear down to his mouth. And then he looked at my managing director, and looked right in the eyes and laughed, and then ran away. Well, she didn't last much longer because, we get scared when things like this happen. There's been a third incident very recently, which I'm not even going to talk about. But the point is that we get scared. I had a reporter from Washington, D.C. call and said he was writing about my work and asked me a bunch of questions. Then he called me up 2 days later, and he said, you need to know this. He said, I called Google. He said, I talked with a woman who he said, I believe was the head of their public relations team. And I asked about your work, he said, and she screamed at me, he said. And he said, I've never seen that before. It's very unprofessional. He said, I'm going to tell you two things. Number one, you have their attention. And number two, if I were you, I would take precautions.
Man, that is so scary.
Well, it is, but I wouldn't be paranoid. I don't think that Google is really coming after you. I really don't think that. But again, it goes back. I guess the primary thing that I just like to say is that algorithm is nasty business, and if you can't figure out what that's doing, it makes it extremely hard for you to replicate those results, no matter what your sample size is. There's so many variables here, doctor. But let me just say, I think you're heading in the right direction. But there's one thing I want to ask you about. There was a Washington Post article on March 14th of 2017. A Wellesley College computer science professor by the name of Panagiotis Metaxas, his whole point about this, and he studied the workings of search engines, and he's got no affiliation with your project, it says. He said that the biggest risk of ranking bias comes from spammers or political activists who seek to manipulate the results, not from the search engines themselves. And I just want to hear, what do you say about that? That's one of your colleagues, basically.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Yes, I know him, of course. Well, and it's an excellent question. And my answer is pretty straightforward. That what he's talking about is a process that's competitive, and there's a whole industry that kind of assists in those efforts to kind of game the search results, called the SEO industry, and it's a very big industry now. But that's competitive. That's not a threat to democracy or to the free and fair election. The problem is, the difference is that if the platform itself decides to support a particular party or a particular candidate, you can't counteract it. You can't compete with what they're doing. Not only that, we've shown in our controlled experiments that what they can mask very easily, because we do it in our experiments whenever we choose. They can mask what they're doing so that no one has the slightest awareness that they're being manipulated. That's very, very dangerous, because people then conclude that they've made up their own minds. And the other problem I've mentioned before is that they're deliberately using ephemeral experiences, ephemeral content for these manipulations. So without a monitoring system in place, think about that. If there's no monitoring system, that means you have no idea whether any votes were shifted using any of these new techniques. You have no idea, and you'll never know. And you have no idea whether there's any deliberate indoctrination of kids, except maybe from a whistleblower. In other words, and you have no data that you can present in court. Our data, because our methodology is so rigorous, is admissible in court. And the larger our system gets, the more credible our results will be.
Right. Well, I understand that. But let me ask you this. There was, and again, I'm kind of pushing back at what I might see as a little bit of a hint of a conspiracy theory here. But earlier you said that Google was funded by the NSA and the CIA. And you said that, I think, in this article that you wrote on medium.com, 7 simple steps towards online privacy, you made that claim. And I guess the point that I want to make and maybe ask you here is you sort of make it seem like Google is very loose with the data that they have. And you mentioned the engineers being able to see emails and this kind of stuff. And you made it seem like Google is very free with the information that they're giving to the NSA and the CIA. And I wanted to clarify, is in your mind, is that happening within as a result of the subpoena process, or is this happening outside of the subpoena process?
I think most of it happens within that process. Google has acknowledged that they share our personal data with intelligence agencies in more than 90 countries. And they do have a very strong ongoing relationship with our own intelligence agencies. And you may have read that as though I was complaining. I don't think I wrote it that way, because the fact is that right at the very beginning, the two founders of Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, working in a building at Stanford University where I've lectured on my research twice now, by the way. Yes, some of the support that was being given to help them develop this kind of search engine was coming from our intelligence agencies. But that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. The intelligence agencies, they foresaw back in the 90s that if the internet, grew, it would be a great place for them to find people who were a threat to national security. So they basically encouraged these two young men to track people's searches, not just to let them search, but to track it so that they could keep an eye on people who might be a threat to national security. That's legitimate, Right. So they have multiple purposes. They're not just out to make money. They're out to make money. They're out to spread their values, as again their own documents say, and as they've said on stages, in front of large groups. And they're also out to aid intelligence agencies, and I think that's legitimate. I've never criticized them for that. I've just reported it. And there are historians who've written very good pieces on the history of Google and have gone into great detail about that relationship between early Google and the intelligence agencies. But again, I consider that to be legitimate.
Well, gentlemen,
Gotcha.
this has been enlightening, man. Do you have anything to add, Frank, on this? Because we're going to wrap up here.
I think that the one thing I want to say is there's been a lot of talk. Everybody thinks that Google is evil, and like I said, I'm not here to defend Google, but there was just something. If I can take 30 seconds, it was called. It was a Wall Street Journal podcast that was done in March of 2023. And they were talking about ethical concerns related to Google's AI development. And they brought up something, and that's one of the reasons why the AI from Google has been so delayed, is I think they're spending a lot of time trying to come up with addressing these ethical concerns, believe it or not. But one of the things that they said in this podcast was that Google's cloud team is trying to grow very rapidly, gain new customers, and some of that work they're looking to do is with the Department of Defense on something called Project Maven. And Kate Linebaugh, who was on the podcast with Wall Street Journal, said that project planned to use Google's AI to help military drones track targets in war zones, and thousands of Google employees weren't happy about that. They signed a petition and said that it went against the company's unofficial motto, "Don't be evil." They called on Google to cancel the project. And eventually, Google did just that, and it promised not to use AI technology in its military weapons. So it just kind of shows you, a good gauge of what a company does is what they do when you're not really looking. So, I just want to kind of push back on...
Frank, that's a great... I'm so glad you brought that up, because what I think is going to happen with I think Dr. Epstein is doing great work and very important work, because I think I'm going to make a prediction, and I love that you brought that up. I think once Google's employees start to see what's actually happening, they are going to agree with Dr. Epstein. I think once their executives start to see that if there is indeed bias on this level, they themselves, I hope, or at least enough of them, or at least some of them will start to say within the company, hey man, something's rotten in Denmark here. And that's why I think, Dr. Epstein, your work is so important. But I love that you kept us honest here, Frank. I really do. And I love that we've at least agreed that I hate to say it, probably needs some regulation here, guys. And
I think you're right.
Yeah, and again, this is so satisfying to me. This has been really our first successful debate in many ways, and I applaud both of you, Dr. Epstein. Don't stop doing this work, man. Don't stop doing this work. And I know it must be scary, and I'm so sorry for your loss, but you're doing important work. This is part of the American experiment. You're keeping us honest, and I don't know what your research is going to conclude 5 years from now, but I think it's already done us a service, and I think it's already put everyone on notice, and at least all of us agree that something is amiss. I like that you were giving Google the benefit of the doubt. Frank, I do it all the time. I'm the same way. I can't stand these conspiracy theories, but this does seem to be a real issue. So, Dr. Epstein,
Bryan, can I?
Yes.
Can I just make a couple of quick comments? Number one, I think we just heard some cherry picking going on because just a few weeks ago, May 3rd, not even a few weeks ago, less than a week ago, Jeffrey Hinton, known as the godfather of AI, quit Google because he feels they're handling AI irresponsibly. He thinks AI presents a serious danger to humanity. And he even said, and I quote from CNN, "It's not clear to me that we can solve this problem. I don't think we can stop the progress." So, that's one of the top people in AI at Google who just quit there.
So scary.
I'd also like to give out a couple of links. And one is my googleresearch.com if people want to actually link to a lot of the scientific papers, or if they want to help support the work, my googleresearch.com. If people are concerned about the surveillance that they're being subjected to 24 hours a day, please go to myprivacytips.com. That's myprivacytips.com, and that is an article that I wrote, which begins with the sentence, "I have not received a targeted ad on my mobile phone or computer since 2014.
Wow.
And Dr. Epstein, does that?
Yes.
Do those privacy tips actually say that you can opt out of Google's information? If they don't, please add it.
Absolutely
just
not.
For the heck of it, just for the heck of it.
Nope, because that's
not in there.
You can click something and that's it, but it has no impact at all on what they're collecting.
You can actually opt out. Don't fight it. I mean, believe it. You can opt out. I think it does something. They're just not empty toggles up there.
All right. Well, Frank, you trust the man, and I understand. And part of it's probably your instinct to say if we can't trust anything, then we have no order and we have anarchy and chaos. So I think the biggest threat, really, in our day and age with all of this, is there's no fixed point of truth, and none of us can even agree on where the source of truth is coming from, and that's a big problem. And I do think that search engines, as they get more and more powerful, are going to have their inherent bias because all of us as human beings do. And
Brian, just the one thing about that is, with AI coming on board, the one thing that you don't get with AI is you don't get all of those nice little blue links. So when it says something to you, to me, it has a higher chance of being, potentially misleading or deceptive because you don't get those links to actually, gauge the answer. You just get the answer. And I think that's a challenge for Dr. Robert Epstein in the future is trying
We've been studying that for years. We call it ABE, the answer bot effect. We published a controlled study on this in one of the top scientific journals in the world last year called the answer bot effect. So if people go to theanswerboteffect.com, they can actually get to that scientific piece. It's either theanswerboteffect.com or answerboteffect.com. I can't remember whether you need the.
We'll put all these
one
links
more link and I'm done.
Yeah.
One more link and I'm done, which is if you want a glimpse of the system that we're building, this large-scale permanent system that will protect our elections and our children, go to americasdigitalshield.com. That's americasdigitalshield.com. And that's a dashboard. It's not live yet, but we have a live version that we haven't posted yet. But by the end of this year, we will post this, and all of America, all the world will be able to monitor bias as it is occurring day by day by day on multiple platforms, not just Google. And that's the beginning of sunlight, because that information will also be shared with journalists with the Federal Election Commission, with members of Congress, and with AGs around the country. And that is going to force these companies to back off, just as Google did in 2020.
And Brian's going to hate me for this, but who funds what you do, Dr. Epstein? Who funds it?
It's funded by people just like you, because if people go to mygoogleresearch.com, they can make donations. When I go on a show like this, in fact, when I went on Joe Rogan's show, we got a lot of money. There were small gifts, medium gifts, large gifts. When I went on Glenn Beck, he got, I think from one show, he got 7,000 people to donate to us.
Wow.
The donations ranged from $1 to $300,000.
Whoa.
And that, yes, because, we're the only team in the world that has the chutzpah or the insanity, or whatever you want to call it, to do what we're doing, to identify and quantify these new means of manipulation. And now, of course, to monitor the real content that these companies are sending to real people. We're the only team in the world doing this.
You're doing God's work.
Dr. Epstein, and it is, you've got a hard road to hoe ahead of you. And I think you're on the right track here, but, I think you'll even agree that there are limitations to that. And it's understanding those limitations and overcoming them almost on a daily basis, because the technology is moving, the AI is moving so rapidly. I mean, you have to at least agree that there are limitations to what you do.
Well, that's why laws and regulations are not going to be too helpful, because tech moves so fast. But monitoring systems, that's tech. And so it can move as fast as the companies do. And I think that's one way of protecting ourselves now and in the future for many years, is by setting up increasingly effective systems that monitor what these companies are sending to people, what they're saying to people, and what they're showing people on screen.
Well, it's a leviathan. It's a leviathan, but dragons are meant to be slain. I appreciate both of you, and this has been a lot of fun for me and very educational. So I appreciate it, Frank Ebersold from All That's Left podcast, and Dr. Robert Epstein. Thank you so much, you guys. This was really fantastic, and we'll do a second installment. I just want to keep getting the word out, so I really appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks. It was great talking to everybody, and I really appreciated the opportunity to talk to Dr. Epstein and understand, what he's doing, and and I hope that maybe what I did just added a level of objectivity, a little bit of pushback. And
absolutely. That was great.
We both got hard jobs, I think. Yeah. We both got a hard job. He's got the job of proving it, and I've got the job of defending Google. But
well, I thank you, Dr. Epstein. You confirmed my bias. But you listen. You make a great argument, and I thought this was very productive. Very productive. So thank you both. You guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Did a great job. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Doctor.
You got it.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro song.